the first face that I saw.
All right, if we could get everybody to find a seat and relax. It's time for the roundtable session. I had some requests for my Nicolas Cage impersonation, but I don't know if it's appropriate. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for being here. My name's Nick Cage. Thank you. Listen, I want to introduce the next real host. His name is Daniel List. And he is the dark journalist. And he's the real host. I'm the clone fake host that stood in for him. So Daniel, come on up, and he's going to ask us some questions, and then we're going to scurry away for the panel.
First of all, Jay did an amazing job while I was trapped in several cities. And all I can say is what I've wanted to ask Jay the whole time is what he thinks of the movie They Live, which I know is a favorite of Catherine's. And everyone up here will know it. So in 2 minutes or less, Jay, They Live.
Well, I think I've had 5 people come up to me and ask, why have you not talked about They Live? And my response is, it's part of the cover-up. I was told, don't talk about They Live. Not really. No, I love that movie. It's great. All of John Carpenter's movies are a blast. The only reason I haven't gotten to it. That's the only reason I haven't talked about it. There's no intentional avoiding of They Live. But no, there's probably no better movie that encapsulates pretty much everything that we've heard from these speakers. So everything from secret technology, a breakaway civilization, everything dealing with the monetary system, the consumer society that we're in, Hollywood, the deception from Hollywood, programming us. It's all in They Live, and that's a great film to deconstruct everything that we've seen in this program. So definitely check that one out, and look forward to jaysanalysis.com. I will have a They Live analysis coming soon. So be sure and check out my stuff there. And Esoteric Hollywood, which is my radio show every Tuesday to Friday night on talknetwork.com.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
And I believe him about the They Live. What do you think? All right, so we're going to do the round table. And, you know, the conference has been unbelievable so far because even though I've been stranded, I've been able to tune in via the live stream. So I want to welcome everyone on that live stream. I know what you were going through. And everyone here, it's so great to see everyone here, especially when I think of the amount of money and time that's been spent trying to keep you in the dark about what's going on there. And then I see all these people come out in the middle of Bastropocalypse. And I'm very encouraged, so thank you. We're going to find those truths together right now. Well,
He lives. Yeah.
is this a dream panel? Unbelievable. For me, it's a dream, let me tell you. I feel like I'm on the set of the Dark Journalist show. What's going on? You know, right off the bat, something that's been occurring to me as I've been musing about the conference and everything that's going on is the main question that I have, and I want these fantastic researchers and writers and speakers to respond to and give us some of their thoughts and all that kind of deep experience that we really need, is secrecy. What about secrecy? What would happen? What is the weakest link in the chain of the secrecy and how deep it goes? Where is their main vulnerability on secrecy?
I can start?
Yeah, please do.
I have, is it on? Testing. There.
Robert.
In the last 2 to 3 years, exactly what Daniel is asking, what is the weakest link in the hold of government and intel on all of the non-disclosure agreements and all the threats, and you will go to prison and your family will have no pension? What I have been seeing for the first time in my career is a bubbling up anger in the people who have been seeking me out, who have been working, whether it was for NSA or DIA or NRO or the government or military. And it is as if something has been unleashed, and I don't pretend to understand why, but the anger that used to be was more in the FU category. Now it is, I want to talk to you, a reporter, about what I have seen, what I have heard, because what is happening on this planet is not fair. And that is the first time in my career that I have heard those words and seen this happening. And so, what is it that provokes a bubbling up of anger in people who have been in a government situation or a military, who have been under this control and been given reasons why? What is happening that they are now themselves speaking out?
That's really fascinating. Well, there's a lot of sharing of information. What do you think is the weakest chain, the weakest link in that chain, Catherine?
Okay, so I would say that there are 3 weak links that are, they look tangential to what we're talking about here, but they're not. The first is healthcare. So the place where people are willing to literally walk and fight the machine is on anything that relates to the success or health of their children. And I don't know if anybody's seen the latest, Ty Bollinger has put out a big series on the truth about cancer.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a perfect example where you see almost everybody suffering from healthcare, whether it's bad healthcare service or money, and that's a place where you can break through on the paradigm. The second one is Common Core. I know Joseph has written and talked a lot about Common Core, but people are realizing their children are going into a system, they're paying for the system. Property taxes is a very big item in everybody's expense budget. They're paying for this system, but they're putting their children into a system that will literally ensure that their children fail. And they won't allow that to happen. One of the greatest successes against the machine in American history was homeschooling. And that was parents saying, nope, I'm not letting you do this, nope. So I am very hopeful that we might get real large-scale walking away. And then the third place is on the money, because when you pull your kids out of school, it's time to get everybody together along with the mayor and sheriff and go down to city council and say, we want to put all of our property taxes in escrow. Why should we pay for something that we're not using? Nobody's showing up at the high school. Why should we pay for the money? Because you got to get into the money, but you got to do it in a way where you can generate income. You see pockets around this country, particularly that are sort of global 2.0, where people need jobs, they need income. And we can create that income by re-engineering the government money in a way that will save money for the taxpayers. There's a win-win. So you and I on the food stamp program are paying for jobs to be shipped to India through JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase gets a big markup, and those jobs could be done for a significantly lower amount of money in our own communities, and then we wouldn't have to pay people unemployment or Social Security, disability, or welfare. So there are thousands of things like this where we can start to mess with the money. But I think before you do the money, you've got to hit hard on busting the paradigm. And I think it's healthcare and it's education, particularly where it affects our children and our family.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Please. See, it's worth traveling through Bastropocalypse to hear that. Joseph, you are writing a book on Common Core.
It's done. It's at the publisher.
And I've had a sneak preview, and it's fabulous.
Wow.
Yeah.
And she wrote the foreword.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I agree with Catherine. I think Common Core is a huge part of the system they're trying to put into place. But I was talking outside with a gentleman after my presentation. We'll just call him Mr. B. He said something that just really resonated with me. The national security state is the national security problem. And if you look at Common Core, the way I looked at it in the book with my co-author, the problem with Common Core is it's another peg in the national security state. And it's also something that's going to dehumanize us. And I've encountered the same thing that Linda has, this phenomenon that people are fed up with the system. The system's no longer working. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those that thinks that everything the government knows, every secret that it has to be disclosed. I think governments have a right and should keep secrets. But there's a difference between that and an all-pervasive surveillance state that is going to choke our creativity, choke our communities, enslave our children by turning them into dumb game-playing morons reacting to questions on a computer screen. That's not education. So I'm in full agreement, you know, with the other two. There's really nothing I can add other than agreement to what they've said.
It's like choking souls, and
It's
once
choking
you do
souls,
that,
right.
then it's the beginning
Right.
of the downslide. For
Well, the gentleman I
children.
talked to put it in the form of choking creativity, and having been a college professor and having seen the forgive me here, but I'm going to throw all my cards down on the table. Without fail, my stupidest and dumbest students were education majors.
Wow.
They were the ones getting the teacher certification. And if you stop and think,
I took education classes.
We'll talk about that later.
we'll
although-
talk about that after.
There's
this.
always an
I
exception.
wasn't an ed major.
No, I'm talking about education majors. And if you look at the problem of American education, it's led to this national security state. And what it's also producing is a leadership class that is itself stupid. You cannot surround yourself, if you're the Rockefellers or the Carnegies, you cannot surround yourself with yes men that agree with your worldview and expect to solve the problems that we're facing. So the problem here, as far as I'm concerned, with education, which I think is a crucial problem to national security, to our ability to remain competitive and competent in space, I think it begins with education. And if you're a teacher out there and you've endured the hours of banality and nonsense that you have to go through to get a teacher certification, it's time to stand up to the doctors of education and the principals and fire them. And for your professional development, rather than going to courses on the latest educational fad or trend, it's time that you get paid to go learn what's happening in the discipline you're expected to teach, be it mathematics, literary criticism, art, music, but more methodology courses paid for on your time after a long day in class. That's not the solution. And I laid my cards on the table, and I'll shut up.
Yes, and Catherine, you're going to follow up on that.
So you know, the problem with what Joseph is saying is I think he's too kind. Because if you look at where Common Core is going, and you know, you have to give it time, but if you look at where it's going to provide direct digital access, probably 24/7, to children by large corporations and the intelligence agencies and the breakaways. And it's going to do that for large chunks of the day with no intervening supervision by teachers, principals, or parents. Now, what I will tell you is that the history of large corporations, intelligence agencies having direct access to our children without any intervening supervision is much darker and uglier than anything that went on at the Vatican. Okay, so this is really not a plan. And at this point, what I'm telling you is we have to take our children out of public schools. It is not physically safe for them.
Wow.
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 It's pretty amazing. You know, Olav, I want you to address that question about, I mean, we're talking about education now. They were saying that's the weak link in the chain of secrecy are people's children. So let's answer that question first, and then I want you can comment on the education stuff.
Sure.
But what is the weak link in the chain?
I actually, education's always a weak link in any chain of anything. If you have a dumbed down populace They
Yeah.
can't question anything that you say.
Yeah.
The math that Catherine shared with us will make no sense. I mean, obviously, we all have to be educated at some fundamental level, or none of this makes sense to anybody, let alone the physics that Dr. Farrell talks about will make no sense. I don't think that that's the weakest link, though. I think that if you want to figure out, if you want to expose something that's part of the national security state, you have to follow the money. And I think Catherine was exactly right about that. I think you've got to follow the money. You need to see where the money's coming in and where it goes. You need to understand special access programs. You need to change the legislation to get the special access programs out of the chain, because that's how they hide the money. That's how they hide the programs. The reason that we know what an Aurora is, you know, those of us who know what an Aurora is, it's a spy plane, right? The reason that we know what an Aurora is because, unfortunately, in a budget many years ago, somebody forgot to remove the tab Project Aurora from the budget. And those, back then, the budget was accountable. They were accountable for the budget. They took it before the Congress. They said, this is our budget. We want X number of dollars for Project Aurora. Somebody at Aviation Week said, hey, what's Project Aurora? Started digging. We found out what it was. Now they hide that stuff. They charge us $10,000 for a toilet seat. They keep 950 of it. They charge us $50, and then they funnel the rest in the special access programs. I think the other part that's a weakness is the people. I think you guys are absolutely right that the people are the weak part. I think you've got a lot of people who are fed up functioning inside these compartmentalized programs. They don't get paid enough. I mean, they have the same problems that we do. They don't get paid enough. They don't get respected enough. You know, and they don't like what they're doing. They don't want to see, you know, nobody wants to go to work on a cruise missile and know that that cruise missile is going to go blow up a bunch of people. I mean, that's not something that anybody wants to do. So over time, they get fed up. But as far as the education, the one unique thing that I have is that I have children, and I have a kid that's in Common Core today, right now. I see Common Core every day.
Huh.
I do his Common Core homework with him.
Wow. How does that feel?
Well, it's incredibly confusing. I went to college, and I'm incredibly confused by it. I understand the logic of what they're trying to teach in the mathematics part. The reading doesn't seem to be so bad, but it's the mathematics where they break it. And I think, you know, they're effectively dumbing it down. One of the core tenets of Common Core is that you can use your fingers to count. And they break everything up into dots, and you're supposed to draw these dots. And I asked the teacher, because we had to have re-education camp, and all of us had to go to the school. And the poor teachers, you know, they don't want to teach us stuff. And so we're sitting there, and there was the best comment of the night. One of the parents said, you know, are you guys attempting to now change the way we do calculus, or is that, you know, that going to stay a constant? And my contribution was, well, you know, we've been doing arithmetic for 3,000 years. Why are we changing it now? And the thing that the teacher said, and I felt bad for them because they're trained very well. I do know what you mean, though, about ed majors. I'm not going to make a comment about that, but one of the things that I said is, you know, you're dumbing down how you're teaching them math. And I said, why don't you just teach them, instead of breaking apart all the numbers and creating a math problem this long, that's basic addition, why don't you tell them to put in the zero? And they said, well, the problem is that the kids say, well, why do I put in the zero? And that confuses them. And I said, well, when I went to school, I'm going to leave the expletive out, but I said, when I went to school, the teacher told me to just put in the zero. And, you know, the explanation was, this is how you do math. The zero goes here. Be done with it.
Catherine, does
So-
that sound like the Common Core?
Yeah, so just FYI, if you look at the latest studies and my understanding, if you want a child to be very successful with financial and economic matters, don't teach them finance, make sure they're excellent at math.
Absolutely.
And so excellence in math is necessary to understand the economics for the finance. And I think one of the reasons, not the only, they're doing this is to make sure that they can understand it.
Well, yeah, if they want you to be a wage slave, you can't understand how credit works. So, I
You know, it's
teach my kids.
interesting. I have a friend, dear friend, who she's working at JP Morgan. Unfortunately, I've tried to talk her out of it for years. But I was talking to her about the name of your presentation, The Space Economy, which I have to say caught my attention immediately. And one of the things she said was, well, I didn't think they even had one. Well, at this point, it probably doesn't make much of a difference anyway. So I wanted to throw that one back at you and answer her
Apparently
question
She doesn't
live.
understand what's going on at J.P. Morgan Chase. She's clearly not in management.
That's very true, actually. How do we answer that question? Because I feel like she's in earnest. She's smart, she's poised, she understands a great many things, but the space economy eludes her completely. Why is that, and what is it about the space economy that is going to make a difference to her?
Here's what I think she would understand. The central banking warfare model for 500 years depended on the sea lanes, and it was controlling the sea lane where, when you look at the Bretton Woods system, it's really a flow control model, okay? So if you think of a water system or a hydraulic pumping system, you're trying to control the flow. And that's why for 500 years it's been the British Navy and then the American Navy that was dominant because they policed the sea lanes. And now what we're doing is that flow is now moving from an Earth-based trade system to both an Earth-based and a satellite-based system.
Okay.
And so what we're watching is greater and greater flow going into both. And part of the problem with keeping the Bretton Woods system going is now you have to police not only the sea lanes, but now you have to police the satellite lanes. So you should tell her the satellite lanes are the sea lanes of the 21st century, and she needs to understand those economics if she's going to understand the economics on the planet. Which, if she's trading derivatives, it's better she not know, so you might not want to bring that up.
She might lose her income.
Yeah, when I was listening to you talking about, is the trade confined, is it a closed system, or is it open, and could it involve ETs?
Right.
It was only a month and a half ago that I was interviewing Lynn Buchanan about all the remote viewing that they had been doing. And he said that he had remote viewed specifically for the DIA. It was a task question. If there are friendlies and unfriendlies, are they psychic or non-psychic? This was a task to him. And in the process of doing that remote viewing and talking with somebody inside of the organization that knows all about ETs, he said, we have trade, ongoing trade. It has been going on between at least this government. And this is the part that is a little bit, you have to wrap your mind into and around this. We got technology from crashes that may have been planted like Trojan horses.
Right.
We get the technology, we take it into these top secret programs with the idea, like Corso and Trudeau, will back engineer and we'll get them into the patent system of the United States to keep them out of human hands. He said, what is happening right now, Linda, in 2015? We have back-engineered technology that was started out as extraterrestrial, and we've made it go further. And now the ETs, the friendly ones, want the products that we have advanced from their extraterrestrial technology, and that we have an ongoing looping trade route, which would be exactly what you were asking the question, where is that money or barter or whatever it is between what we've made that they now want?
Right. So, can I?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
So everyone knows Elon Musk warned about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And I think, I don't pretend to look into what he was really thinking, but what I will tell you is I think artificial intelligence is wildly dangerous. I know. Because you are opening up backdoor control to alien civilizations and interdimensional forces.
Exactly.
And we don't begin to understand how to deal with that or control it. And I think that's, Musk was very careful in his words, but when he said basically you have to worry about demonic forces, he was exactly right. And that's why this stuff is very, if you think cyber hacking between the US and China is bad, wait till you get into interdimensional. And it's very bad.
You've done some stuff on artificial intelligence. Where are you going with that? What do you think of that?
I think the real danger of artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence, the day it truly exists, whether it exists now or not, I don't know. One system passed the Turing test, which is a critical test for self-thinking. Some people think that it was rigged. It may have been. The true absolute problem with artificial intelligence is that it's cold and it's calculated.
Yes.
Because when you use a computer, whatever you put into the computer is what you get out of the computer. And it's completely detached. There's no emotion, there's no compassion, there's no generosity. It basically comes down to the fact of, well, the AI system decides that this city is consuming too much power, so it will shut off the extra power that it's consuming. I find that to be a fairly dangerous concept, and and it's not. The other problem with with AI is that it functions once it becomes functional and becomes self-aware. The first thing that it's going to do is worry about its own survival. So in doing that, I mean, it's Skynet, right? In doing that, it's going to create a system like an octopus.
Right.
And it's going to automatically start replicating itself to prevent destruction. So you have this system that has no emotion, that's replicating out of control and infecting, like a virus, everything that it can find, because it has to control resources. Because cutting off resources cuts off itself. It's like cutting the head off a chicken.
When you mentioned replicating there, it made me think, Joseph, of these strangelets that you've written about. Can you tell us a little bit about the CERN strangelets?
I need a translator for Common
In
Core.
5 seconds.
5 seconds. Strangelets are, there's a conspiracy theory out there, quark gluon condensate is something that there's all these conspiracy theories out there about CERN producing strangelets. Well, strangelet is a kind of state that plasma physicists, particle physicists think exists shortly after the Big Bang, and there's a party out there that thinks that CERN is trying to produce these things. And in fact, if you go online and read the actual CERN statements, you will find statements where there were statistically minimal, I mean, just a billion times tinier than infinitesimal, okay? Probability that they would create these things. It would be like the particle equivalent of gray goo in nanotechnology. These things would just replicate and replicate and replicate and eventually swallow up the Earth.
Right. Swallow up the earth was that last line. So we know what we're talking about here with the strangelets.
My whole approach to CERN is very, very different.
Yes.
I take the view that maybe the particle physics is a cover story, and that there might be something else altogether going on.
Well, let's go into that, because I think this all is leading us into CERN, actually. And CERN, there's something about this, which is you pointed out in your latest book, which is a fantastic book. I have to tell you, I've been reading it on the plane, and it is, just incredible that you looked at this budget and you said, $6 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a military-style budget.
It's a
for
military-style
CERN.
budget.
And the other thing you addressed was this fascinating sort of exultation, this awesome feeling of the scientists and the PR around it, as if it was some kind of savior of humanity.
Well, yeah,
This is CERN, the Hadron Collider that we're talking about here.
In Geneva.
In Geneva, yeah. It is true, you can go online and find publications of certain scientists extolling CERN, and they're writing in this religiously ecstatic language. They call it a cathedral and a temple and, a magnificent, man's most magnificent, and on and on and on it goes. And then it doesn't take much digging to find out that the discovery of the Higgs boson, there were some scientists questioning, the legitimacy of that. But my real problem, I'm not a scientist or anything like that, and I'm looking at this machine, and we're spending more and more money to take essentially smaller and smaller particles and smash them together and pick the gnat you-know-what out of the pepper and call it something significant that the standard model predicts. And this is where my difficulties and their philosophical difficulties begin, because you're looking at a military budget for this machine to find smaller and smaller building blocks in the standard model of physics, okay? And I'm looking at the machine and I'm seeing something very different. The Large Hadron Collider, if you don't know, is a machine constructed of 5 actual particle accelerators. It begins with a linear accelerator which injects the proton stream into the other 4. And then the final 2 stages, you've got, of course, the Large Hadron Collider, which is that 27 circumference collider at Geneva. And above that, there's another particle accelerator called a proton synchrotron that is above, several meters above the Large Hadron Collider. And if you have the rings of the collider, this would be the Large Hadron Collider, then the proton synchrotron sits above it, and if you were to bring it down on the Large Proton, or the Large Hadron Collider, it would sit on the rim of it. Okay, so it's canted off the axis of rotation of the Large Hadron Collider, is what I'm saying. And if you look at the magnetic field strength of the Large Hadron Collider, I think it's something between 8 and 10 Teslas in some of its detectors. You're dealing with a magnetic field that is several times more powerful than the local magnetic field of the planet Earth. Wow. And this is where my problems begin, because it's the magnetosphere of the Earth that protects us from solar radiation. It's part of our environment. It's part of what maintains life on this planet, that drives the weather systems. And that magnetosphere, in turn, is coupled with that of the sun. So when you look at this the way I'm looking at it, I'm seeing a planetary machine which by the very nature of the strength of the magnetic fields in rotation is creating a massive torsion machine, a magnetic torsion machine. And that is embedded in piezoelectric rock in Europe. And this is going to have a magnetic effect on the planetary magnetic system. And that was my thought all along. So I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this as a story where they're really putting out a public consumption story for us with blizzards of equations that will confuse us all, and we'll just throw up our hands and say, well, they're doing particle physics. But I think the real physics they're doing is that this is a planetary machine that is manipulating the magnetosphere of the Earth, which, through various electromagnetic effects, can even influence the sun.
And recently, in the last 3 weeks, that one of its goals is to penetrate another dimension.
And yes, I was just getting to that, because if you're looking at this machine with the eyes of Gabriel Krohn, who's one of my favorite unsung physics and engineering geniuses, this is a man that took tensor calculus. If you study physics, you know what tensor calculus is, and said, well, we can use tensors to explain anomalies that we electricians notice in large networked and particularly rotating electrical, and what's the collider? Rotating electrical machines. But here's the curveball. The tensors that we must use to do this are hyperdimensional. In other words, they're mathematical equations in more than 3 spatial dimensions. So the Hadron people have finally come out and said and admitted, well, yeah, we might be looking for extra dimensions too. Well, yeah, duh. You're playing around with a hyperdimensional machine to begin with, So, I think the whole thing is the particle physics thing is a big cover story, and all the particle.
Did they find the God particle?
They gave a Nobel Prize to Higgs for predicting the Higgs, and somebody claims to have found it. I have misgivings. I have misgivings that that's what this huge machine is really all about. And here's the curveball, folks. They want to build a bigger one.
Huh.
Yeah, China wants to build one. Germany wants to build an even bigger one. So now, you know, everybody's in this absurd race to build big, huge machines to whirl really tiny stuff, which amount to nothing but packets of mathematical information, really, when you get right down to it, around these big racetracks. The way I'm looking at it is that there's more to these things than meets the eye, and very little of it. And again, I caution you folks, I'm just a hack from South Dakota. I'm not a scientist, but that's the way it looks to me.
And one
Well, that's, oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's a $6 billion, you know, racetrack there, if we think of it that way. That kind of money obviously doesn't get allocated for the scientific grant, so obviously there is a deeper tie there. Catherine, Mr. Global, what does he think of CERN?
He wants them to do what he tells them to do. They're doing what he's telling them to do, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't, you know, clearly $6 billion doesn't get spent on this planet without Mr. Global signing the,
Check.
right.
Yes. The Apple Pay card.
So now, but here's what's interesting, you know, we're watching a process where clearly Mr. Global has turned to the BRIC nations and said, okay, I want you to provide competitive alternatives. So I don't want to bet the ranch in the United States. I want you guys to go out and do your own internet, your own payment systems. You know, everybody wants their own global, you know, GPS global satellite system. You know, everybody wants their own aircraft carriers now. But the thing I find really interesting is everybody wants their own collider. At the same time, they've all announced expeditions to the dark side of the moon. So what's that about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
Linda,
And
yes.
there is one thing that picks up from exactly what they were both saying. If in fact the particle physics experimentation at the collider in Geneva always had the goal of trying to get to a point where they would have the energy to start penetrating other dimensions.
Right.
Has that goal been provoked by non-humans someplace else that want the doors open to Earth?
May I?
And that this whole issue of what human minds, or what look like humans on the outside, are being provoked with certain kinds of inspirations. And one of the most peculiar, if you look back through history and juxtaposed to now, is Albert Einstein. The very fact that he would, from childhood on, have this mental facility to see and experiment with physics in his mind, and that E equals mc squared would lead to the atomic age. Why was Einstein, when he was on the timeline, and was that inspiration provoked by specific non-humans? And we now know from all of the work that John Burroughs and I have been doing on RAF Bentwaters, that when the UK government does a 460-page report called Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, and that inside of it, it names and labels and says there are non-ionizing frequencies that the unidentified aerial phenomena and intelligence use that manipulates, this is a direct quote, manipulates human minds and damages human tissues. The question of when does a human know that it's their thought, their imagination, their dream, or something that is provoked by another intelligence from the outside that is trying to manipulate humans for its own gain. This is not what any of us want, but I think if we don't consider these ideas and possibilities and hypotheses, we will be weaker. And that what is happening at CERN could definitely fall into the category of a manipulation by an outside goal.
Well, may I add something? I want to take people back to San Mateo last year. And in my second presentation, I pointed out that I have what I call the Farrell corollaries to the Kardashev classification system. Kardashev was a Russian astronomer that classified extraterrestrial civilization types according to the energy needs of their civilization. A class 1 civilization was a civilization that required the energy of an entire planet. A Class 2 civilization was a civilization that required the energy of an entire star. A Class 3 civilization was a civilization that required the energy of an entire galaxy. Now, my corollaries are, if you're in the national security establishment, a Class 3 civilization isn't going to be interested in us. But a Class 2 or 1 civilization might be, and here's why. If you're in the national security establishment and you think you're dealing with that kind of civilization, then you need to do what I suggested here at this conference and last year, a bit of space gunboat diplomacy, and demonstrate a human capacity to engineer systems of those scales. So with the Hadron Collider and its potential resonance effects on the magnetosphere of planet Earth, you're engineering systems on a planetary scale.
Right.
And by dint of the fact that that magnetosphere is in contact with that of the sun in a complex, and please note my words here, and Dr. LaViolette points this out so many times in his works, by dint of open physics, open systems physics, by dint of the fact that the magnetosphere of the Earth is in a complex open systems relationship with the sun, it is conceivable, in my mind, at least theoretically, and again, I'm not a scientist, that the Hadron Collider, by dint of its huge electromagnetic fields and the fact that it's embedded in a piezoelectric rock and a piezoelectric morass in a nonlinear medium, in other words, by dint of all these facts, it seems at least possible to my mind, to my layman's mind, that this might be a machine capable of engineering or manipulating effects on a stellar scale. Now, I mention all this because someone else out there is thinking the same thing and has been correlating dips in the local field strength of the Earth's magnetic field in the northern hemisphere when CERN is turned on. So, yeah, So I just throw that out there. That's my
So you
addition
know
to
the
her.
correlation between sunspots and the stock market?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
So what I'm wondering is whether they're trading this.
Probably.
And KIC 84, that big star,
Yes.
1,480 light years away.
Yes.
They're now looking at seriously why, over the last 4 years, has it gone up and down, up and down, up and down in brightness,
Yes.
of which one of the dips was 22%. And to give you some sort of a comparison context, if we study what stars looking for the possibility of an orbiting planet, the most that our astronomers have ever seen in those systems is a 1% dim in the star brightness. We're talking about KIC at 22%, 15%, 10%, 5%, 7%, and it's been doing this multiple times for the last 4 years. It may be a Kardashev 2, and that is the category in which a civilization is advanced enough to build a structure around a sun to gather energy, and that what they're getting, because there are so many dimmings, there have to be a tremendous number of large objects that are causing the dimming. It isn't one, it's a whole mass. KIC 84, you're going to hear a lot more. SETI has now turned the Allen array on it as of 10 days ago. They've put in an official request for Green Bank to start looking at it, which may happen as early as May or June. And there's another group that is going to start looking at this star. And this is another interesting thing, that when you have a planet going in front of a sun, you'll get a bell-shaped curve that is even and symmetric in terms of it gets dimmer and then it gets brighter. They have not had one symmetric bell-shaped curve on any of these objects between here and KIC.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, Olav, they say there's a lot about this.
Okay.
That Kick 84 is an alien structure in front of a number of planets. Now, what's funny is a semi-official channel put that out at first, and now I think they're going for the, sort of inflate the hot air balloon and then let it out and say, oh no, it was just a meteorite. What is going on there? What do you think?
Well, obviously I'm not a physicist, but if I had to guess anything, I think that because of the irregular nature at which you see the dips and the irregular size of the dips, I think you're probably seeing the construction of a Dyson sphere. If I had to guess, I would say it's the construction phase of a Dyson sphere.
So explain that
Okay,
just,
so
just
what is
briefly.
that?
That's
Sure, okay.
That's Kardashev 2 when they
Yeah.
can actually build.
So there's a guy named Freeman Dyson who's a physicist, and he came up with the idea that if you take all the planets in a solar system and crush them and strip out the material, that you could have enough material to create a shell around a star. And the way you do it is you create a series of hexagonal plates that are free floating, and then they're compressed in by the gravitational pull of the star. And then what you do is you normalize the surface of the hexagonal plates, and then you live on the inside. You have 24-hour daylight, but you also have total access to the sun. And then you can put systems in place to suck energy right off the sun. The byproduct of which, though, is the star effectively disappears because you build a shell. So the
Well,
Dyson's,
who was making that?
who's making it?
It was Dyson's,
It was Dyson's theory.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
it
know.
was Dyson's
But
theory.
the idea,
1950.
yes.
Who-
But
who's
who do you
building it?
think? You've spent so much time looking at human causes for alien interaction.
Sure.
And you look at alien interaction. Who's building that?
Well, I have to say I love the Dyson sphere. The Dyson sphere and ring worlds are fascinating to me personally. But, one of the interesting things that I read a long time ago was Dr. LaViolette's book on the pulsars, and this notion that the pulsars were a communications network and a navigation network, and also an emergency warning network for the galactic superwave. And, if you built a Dyson sphere, Dr. Laviolette could probably speak to it better than I can, but I would imagine that if you build a Dyson sphere, you could put shielding in place to try to survive it. But
Wow.
as far as who's building it, I mean, obviously, if there are a bunch of people out there that created gravity lenses to create pulsars, they would have the capability to harness stellar energy, and they could build a Dyson sphere. But I think we're watching it being built, and I think every day you're watching more of it being built because it's linear.
So one thing that's interesting about that is Dr. LaViolette, of course, did a wonderful presentation on this, but one of his theories that he worked on was about this cosmic wave. And just to summarize that cosmic wave, which is coming in from deep in the galaxy, when it comes here, it causes earthquakes, pole shifts, the magnetic center of the Earth changes, and we see massive destruction. So is it right that you're suggesting that powers here in our space program are building that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
I think
this is where we're going to go
We-
for everybody next, which is
Civilization 2.
Civilization
Yeah,
2.
I mean,
Who is going to be the focus for the next bit here? So I want to start with who.
I think in the case of that star, I think we have the technical and the theoretical capability to build a Dyson sphere. If we were starting construction of a Dyson sphere or participating in it, you'd see planets disappearing because you need mass on that scale. I think whoever's building that, I would imagine it's a Dyson sphere or a ring, but whoever's building it lives there. That would be my assumption. So it'd be aliens, is what you're looking at.
Okay, the aliens. Joseph,
One type of alien.
one type of alien.
Civilization 2.
Civilization 2. Joseph, you have talked about the cousins. A lot of your work isn't dedicated, frankly, to finding out about aliens and alien research or alien abduction or anything like that. And yet, there's this vital research you've done on the UFO and on the cousins. So the who part is starting to get to me on this one. I think it would be nice if I could get a summary from each of you about who. And when I think about your work, I think you're not really looking for that, the gray alien.
No.
So what is it that you see out there?
I'm a text person. And if you go back and look at ancient texts, there are the predominant descriptions of anything that we would consider to be extraterrestrial are of three basic types. One, in Mesopotamian culture, is a fish god. Mesoamerican culture has the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha. And then you have humanoids, essentially, either larger and some very
Wisdom bringers.
yeah, larger, or in some very few cases, smaller versions of us. And it's that group that fascinates me the most, because in terms of all of the textual indications that we might be chimerically, perhaps genetically manipulated or engineered into existence, the easiest material to do that with would be a close genetic cousin, another species of Homo sapiens within the genus Homo. We're Homo sapiens sapiens. Well, if you stop and think about it, the easiest way to do that would be something close to us. And it's interesting to me, if you go out and read ufological literature, a few years ago, there was a set of documents that appeared at a fellow's name by the name of Cooper, the so-called Cooper-Cantwell documents. And I have a few of these in SS Brotherhood of the Bell.
Amazing, amazing book.
And there's one statement in one of these documents, I forget which one it is, that says, and this is obviously being said as the opinion of a scientist, and I want you to consider the breathtaking nature of this statement, because I'm not concerned whether the documents are authentic or not. I'm concerned with their contents. And what the statement says is we must consider that there might be a higher order between biology and physics. And this is a scientist talking. This is the language of a scientist. It's like a mathematician looking at the inadequacy of human mathematical language to describe it all in one equation, so to speak, and calling for a higher order topology or a higher order mathematics, a language more capable of dealing with more concepts. So I'm looking at this statement, and here's a scientist saying, and I believe it was a biologist, saying that we need a higher order look, we need a higher order model that is able to unite in a very fundamental, simple, elegant, conceptual way the biological and physical sciences. Now, for someone to say that in a document that's fake or deliberate disinformation means that they had to have a high degree of scientific training. And again, if it's authentic, it makes you think. So I'm thinking that insofar as we might be dealing with anything like that, it's more likely, to answer your who with a big, huge speculation, it's more likely that we're dealing with something that looks like us, walks like us, talks like us, quacks like us, than anything else. It would seem to me human nature that we'd be more inclined, if we're confronted with, a smorgasbord of potential extraterrestrial species to deal with. Who are we going to deal with? Well, the ones that seem most familiar.
Fascinating. Yeah. Catherine, this is really amazing to me. You have the most incredible resume, Wall Street, Washington. You're in that financial, business, economic world now. You will come forward and discuss UFOs. What does that business world think, those business contacts and those people in that world, when you talk about UFOs, which can't be the most popular topic there in those realms? And what is compelling you to step outside of that box? You do it on so many issues like the black budget and secrecy, political corruption, and the myriad of things I've learned at Solari University. But UFOs was a very bold thing, even still, for you to come out and talk about. Why would you put that on the agenda?
I think what I'm interested in, when you deal with money and investments, unless the investment succeeds, you lose your money. So it tends to force you to want to look at reality, because if you invest based on the official reality, you're going to lose a lot. I mean, a lot of people over the last 20 years have lost a lot of money investing in the official reality, and the official reality wasn't true. And what I see, believe it or not, I have a sub-expertise in financial fraud, so I used to call myself the cleaning lady of financial fraud. And when you clean up enough fraud, it builds a tremendous desire to protect people from fraud. And what I see is one of the greatest causes of fraudulent exploitation of people financially is they don't understand the hidden system of finance, they don't understand the black budget, and it causes them to make terrible decisions because there is this gigantic material emission. And I was trained, you know, when you are trained as a young associate on Wall Street, one of the things you have beaten into you is the concept of material emission, and we talked about it last year at the conference. Under 10b-5, if I encourage you to make an investment and I fail to disclose to you something that is material to your assessment of that investment, that is a criminal felony, and I can go to prison for that.
Wow.
And if you look across the financial system right now, we are creating a massive material emission. And for example, if you look at all the different communities that kept saying, oh, the economy's going to collapse, the economy's going to collapse, what they're not realizing is we are transferring out of the black budget technology that could explode the wealth on this planet by many hundreds of multiples.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean, you know, that it's all going to be wonderful or rosy, but they need to know that before they spend an enormous amount of time. You know, I've seen people basically sell everything, run off into the woods, buy lots of guns, eat lots of beans, you know, buy lots of dehydrated food, and when they finally come out 4 years later, everybody's passed them by, and it's a real fight to get back into the economy. So
Yeah.
you know, we need.
So running away doesn't work.
No.
Running
That's
away
not the
doesn't-
solution.
Yeah, running away doesn't
Never
work,
have.
and we need to be able to integrate this question mark into our map of how the money works and how it relates to our personal money, because as I said, we are financing the black budget one household at a time.
Right.
And the thing that I try and do at Solari, you know, my goal in life is to help everybody have a free and inspired life. The more people who can have a free and inspired life, the more we can shift the direction of things. But we can't do that unless we can build very strong immunity to having our pocketbook emptied by the black budget.
And so, in a sense, you had to bring up the UFO concept, even if it was uncomfortable, in order for your subscribers and the people who follow your information not to get harvested by a system that is draining money out of the system in order to create
We're trying to shift the power equation between the lunatics and the adults,
Yes.
in favor of the adults.
Can you say that again?
We're trying to shift the power equation between the lunatics and adults.
That's what we're all trying to do, right?
Right. So for those of you who have seen They Live, I did a wonderful interview when I first met Daniel. He's trying to figure out what I'm about. And he's like, I don't know about your site. You're all over the place, whatever. And he goes through the whole thing. And then he calls me up and he says, oh, I realize you're trying to give people a pair of sunglasses.
Exactly.
So you figured it out, yeah. So how do you explain that? I'm trying to give you a pair of sunglasses if they don't even know.
Yeah. I find it so fascinating because there are so many people who will resonate with your material and they understand your expertise around these things and they understand the deep knowledge and they've gotten a lot from it. And then they hit the UFO part and they're like,
Well, but it's interesting, when I try and talk to people about the UFO thing, you know, we did this when we did Dark Journalists, I said, look, that's $150 trillion of hardware.
yes.
You know, I'm a financial person. I want to know, you know, where are the factories, who's building it, what stocks are it running through. I had a great lunch with these guys in Amsterdam, and there was a wonderful business guy there who said, and he used to be a trader and now is in business, and he said, you know, I used to look at the elevator companies and I think, how could their stock be going up that much? And then I learned about the underground bases from you, and now I know their stock's going up.
Well, it's fascinating. You know, that all loops in, actually, to the Phoenix Lights because that thing you ascribed there, the cost to, was about the Phoenix Lights. And
Just tell them what I said. When I
yes,
said-
please.
I looked at it and I said, oh, that's where the $4 trillion go. I bet for $4 trillion, Lockheed would build that for $4 trillion. Yeah, they would build that for $4 trillion.
Now, this is really interesting. Pepsi recently developed a commercial that incorporated the Phoenix Lights. And the Phoenix Lights, everyone in this audience knows, but I'm going to say it anyway. We've got a live stream. The Phoenix Lights was a major case in 1997 where these
March 13th.
March 13th. I'm going to have actually Linda tell us what the Phoenix Lights was because she knows all about it. Please do.
It was extraordinary, and I remember being live on Coast to Coast with Art Bell when that night, I think it was the one turnaround, there was a truck driver who called in, and then I got to talk with him and then came back on with Art. And he had been on one of the freeways coming into Phoenix, and his was 10:30 at night, and he was seeing these big, huge orange, pumpkin orange globe lights just sitting over what was Luke Air Force Base. And he said, I had no idea what I was looking to, but when they both went and they were gone, he said, that cannot be anything that we have built. That's 10:30 at night. In the earlier part of the evening, which is, I think, the really important part of what happened on March 13th, 1997 in Phoenix, there were several different groups of eyewitnesses, and the one that was the most outstanding were 5 people in a family in a car, and they had been coming from Tucson to Phoenix, and one of the daughters was going to a track meet. And the father was driving. The mother was right behind the father in the back seat next to, I think there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 2 daughters in the back, and there was another family member. So there were 5 people. And they all see at the same time something coming low and toward the car, and the father yells out to the mother in the back, but everybody in the car, he said, when I yell, start counting, and just count every second. And he was an engineer.
And it was slow, right? That's the one
Very
that,
slow.
Yeah, it was
Oh,
extremely slow.
when they saw it, the father was the professional, and he's the one who thought, this is low, this is huge, and I'm traveling, and he knew what the speed was that he was traveling, and he held it on the freeway, and this thing came right over the car. And I talked to every person who was in the car. I talked to all 5 people. And they said that as it came low, they could see lines, not rivets. They saw strange patterns throughout this huge thing. When they finished the count and the last back of it went over the car, the father driving said that has to be 2 miles long. Up on a mountain, 2 real estate people who had just come up to their house above a real estate, they had laid out the roads, and they knew that the real estate development was 1.8 miles long from one end to the other. They had the experience of this thing coming almost below them or right at their eye level. That's how low it was. And they could see when it got from one end to the other of their grid, their streets, that it was covering this 1.8 miles, which was close to 2 miles. And there were others who saw this. And I'm going to jump to, that was between 7 to 8, then approximately 8 to 10, those are when the arc of lights were shown and videotaped from the various people downtown. So you had 2-mile huge triangle, you had the arc of lights, and then you had those huge orange glows. The truck driver wasn't the only one who saw them over the Luke Air Force Base. The eerie, really spooky part was that the next day, because I had been on the radio with Art that night, I had been to a Cranford, New Jersey, what they called boutique computer maker, who was contracted with a department in the DOD, Department of Defense. I had been to see them on a completely different story. It had to do with something that had happened, and they were making boutique computers, meaning that when DoD would say, we need a computer that will do X, this was a company in Cranford, New Jersey, that would make these very special computers for DoD. The next day, after March 13th, 1997, I got a call from that man that I had been in his company, had interviewed him, knew him. He called and he said, I can't stay on the phone very long, Linda. I'm sure you're tapped and I'm tapped. I just want you to know that last night, while all of that was happening in Phoenix, one of our most critical Department of Defense satellites was melted by a UFO. Click. Now, what does it all add up to?
Wow.
Yeah. And was the triangle in Lynn Buchanan's friendly or unfriendly category? And what about the arc of lights? What about the orange lights? And what would have melted one of our DoD satellites? The friendly, unfriendly category in all of this is always there, and we're always trying to figure it out, and it was involved with March 13th, 1997. But when people say, aren't you afraid? No. No. My dominant characteristic is curiosity, because if we are dealing with that which made standing up primates, there's only one thing I would like to understand is, why did you do this? Who are you? What is your vested interest in us on this planet? And that whoever made us, it is about time that all of humanity understood the truth and was freed, even if this is a universe that plays below the belt.
Yes, yeah.
Let me just mention one interesting thing about the Phoenix, or several interesting things from a political standpoint. One is that the governor of Arizona, who tried to poo-poo the reality of what had happened, even in the face of a city council member really leading an effort to bring transparency, later when he left office admitted that it was a UFO. I believe.
Fife Symington.
Right, and
Fife
that was a very courageous act, but that's on the record. It's in a number of documentaries. It's very, so you have a city council member, you have, there were thousands of citizens who obviously saw it, but you had such an effort by the citizens to make documentaries. And here's what's really interesting. That documentary, when I first moved to Hickory Valley, Tennessee, and went into the video store in Bolivar, Tennessee, it was right up there, you know, in the recommended pile. It was all over the country. So somebody really used that documentary to try and help people come to grips with the whole phenomenon.
Even though the government said, oh, it was nothing but flares, a flare exercise over,
Right.
I mean,
But
gosh.
there's no way you're going to have that documentary in every
That's right.
Blockbuster video store
That's-
right in the front unless somebody wants that to happen.
the very fact that it was allowed. And that comes back to where we started, the burbling up.
Right.
There is a lot of anger by really decent people who have been trying to work for intel and military, and they are more frustrated than they've ever been.
Right.
You know, I wanted to mention that there is somebody special in the audience, and I don't know if they're actually still here, but if Douglas Caddy is here, I certainly would like him to come forward, and we'll give him time to do that. You know, Olav, one quick thing, since we're talking about the Phoenix Lights, which, as I was saying, was brought to you by Pepsi now. So I guess, you know, they're interested in the Phoenix Lights for some reason.
Corporate sponsorship.
Yes, corporate sponsorships are moving into space, and Richard Branson is just waiting for the aliens. You know so much about the Phoenix Lights. You spent so much time on it. Was it a man-made phenomena, or was it an alien craft?
You know, by the way, I want to mention that when the apocalypse does come, make sure you go to the Cog Bunker, because they have Starbucks. You missed that part.
Slide.
Yeah. You know, I've seen things that I can't explain. I mean, I do. it's a hard question. Really, a lot of people break into two camps. There's the people who think that aliens did it, and there's people who think we did it. There's not a lot of people in the middle. As an individual, which is all I can speak for, I think that roughly 10%, maybe sometimes more, maybe sometimes less, but 10% is alien in nature. Typically, when I see things like when I was listening to Linda on Art Bell in 1997, freaked out of my mind, I was like, there are aliens and they're invading. But
Did you ever dream you'd be sitting right next to her?
never in my whole life. And it is an honor.
Yes. For me it is also.
But to answer the question, I think 90% of what we see is human manufacture by one of the groups. Now, as many people who have spoken here have pointed out, there are multiple divisions within it. In mine, I kind of lumped it up to there are Nazis and there are other people. But the truth is that there's, even within that other group, there are bazillions of subdivisions based on corporate affiliation, based on nationality. I don't know which faction built those things, but I personally think that at least of the three, because there are three, as she pointed out, there are three distinct events.
Sure.
I think at least two of them were human.
Now,
But not that 2 mile trial.
No.
Yeah,
I think that one, if I had to say that any of them were built by an alien, I would say
Yeah.
it's the two, because it wasn't actually a triangle, it was actually V-shaped, if I remember correctly.
yeah, let's get into this a little bit.
They said that it
I
was a solid.
yeah, I want to really let's bring this into
Low and slow.
what it was, because here's the thing: what is the message of something like the Phoenix Lights? Here's the way I understand it. There's this huge craft that goes over the city. There are a number of people out there comet watching that night, so you're going to get a big audience, whoever you are. What would be the reason for a human creator of a Phoenix Lights craft to strut that machine over a major city while people are comet watching?
Power.
Catherine?
Here's the thing. There are so many possible reasons why you might do it. I mean, basically, one is to encourage obedience. Okay, it could be by the military, or it could be by the state or federal government. So one is treaty compliance, so to speak.
Engendering fear.
It's basically saying, we have a real problem with what you're doing, and we want, we want to enforce, but before we take physical action against you, we're going to remind you that we can.
Oh.
And we can do it in a way that can really subvert your authority. Now, I will say this, because I was on journalist, and I said, look, it's $150 or $140 trillion of hardware, and I had a great subscriber write and said, oh, well, it's not real hardware, it's holograms. So-
Right. Yeah, here's the hologram escape clause.
Right.
Oh, they're just holograms.
They're just
That's hologram technology. So your answer actually was
So-
very good. You said, then whoever's doing those holograms has the control then. Because if
Right.
you can do that, forget it.
Right. So I think obedience, one of the questions I had watching it was, is it possible that the invisible, that the craft itself had a problem, that it was either moving dimensions unintentionally or the invisible cloaking was coming off? So it didn't necessarily mean for that to happen quite how it happened.
Accidental reveal. Linda,
Jammed frequency.
Yes.
Linda, I want to ask you the same question, but using an off-world culture as the perpetrator of flying over the city and sitting there while people are out comet watching. What would be the purpose or the reason behind an off-world culture doing something like that?
To me, the answer would have been that next day when the guy called and said that one of our DoD satellites was melted, because that would imply that we were either in collaboration with, it was a break in the Versailles Treaty, it was somebody's FU, and it was a serious one because it apparently damaged, I mean, a lot of valuable stuff. So if the non-humans are not making themselves in our faces every day and they're not landing, but they can hurt this government or any government very easily. And there is something about that I've seen through the animal mutilations. When a government is forced through law enforcement and every other level to lie, and the sheriffs know they are lying, and you sit across from a sheriff and says, I've had to tell total lies on this, Linda, and I'm admitting it to you. We're not dealing with coyotes, we're not dealing with disease, and we're not dealing with satanic cults. Then what you realize is that World War II, counter-intel got us through that war. We survived, and it was a terrible time, and I think it was involved with extraterrestrial manipulation then too. But you come out of World War II, and whatever the ante is about this planet, which means somebody has vested interests, and the vested interests seem to be at conflict. Otherwise, you wouldn't hear people who have worked in the government describe their work as being to monitor and analyze geopolitical territorial conflicts of 3 competing extraterrestrial civilizations on this planet, which I've heard. And we are forced, suppressed, kept completely in the dark. But if there are 3 non-human groups and they're fighting with each other and there are geopolitical territorial conflicts, each of those 3 must have some vested interest in perpetuating the conflict. And it's exactly where you two also have come into saying what would be the reason for all that missing money in relationship to, is it a closed or an open economic world? And it seems to me it's becoming clearer and clearer. This has been an open barter system for a very long time, with humans only being one part.
Joseph,
And
is
now
that-
we're waking up.
Is that, wow, that is fascinating.
Well, I think it's opening up some truth.
Gee, that's something to consider. Now, Joseph, is this a Tower of Babel moment?
Well, I got to tell you, I was at home listening to Art Bell when she was on that night too, and I too didn't think I'd be up here talking about this with her. So you know, it's an honor for me. But I look at it this way. You know, again, I'm taking an historical and what I hope is a rational approach. I tend to think, like Olaf, that there's an element of the Phoenix Lights that is human, and there's an element that possibly isn't, and in my opinion, probably isn't. Although in my opinion, I think the triangle, believe it or not, may be the human component. And I know that sounds outrageous because that's the biggest, you know, supposedly, thing that they saw.
But it's the simplest.
It's the simplest, and we'll talk about why I think, you know, it might be. But anyway, I was really interested in that because I too had the feeling that this was some sort of operation, a psyop or something. There was something going on here. Somebody was making a demonstration and somebody else was making a counter demonstration. And years later, when I was doing the research for saucers, swastikas, and psyops, I ran across a statement that I found Magda Goebbels, who was the wife of Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, that she made in her diary, saying that her husband, Dr. Goebbels, had just returned from some secret weapons demonstration, and he had seen wonders and miracles. And then Otto Skorzeny kind of enters this story by saying that he wanted to use this marvelous technology in a guerrilla warfare operations behind enemy lines. And it was that precise observation that gave me the idea that, well, if you're going to start building technology like this, how are you going to use it? Well, you're going to use it to make demonstrations, not necessarily to us, but to them. And with the satellite, I didn't know this part about the satellite. My inclination now is to think that this was demonstration and counter-demonstration.
Exactly.
As to who initiated it, I don't know, but
Exactly.
that's my speculation at the moment.
Okay, so let me see if I can tie this up. So we have a craft that's out there, and it fries this DoD piece of equipment. And then there's a counter demonstration. Now, whoever did that, we're just going to assume for now that it's an alien, off-world culture. And then we move into something else. We've got the response. And that's coming from a very advanced wing here. We could call that the breakaway civilization or just the heights of our military. But you have...
But we don't know which came first, the satellite melt or the demonstration over Phoenix.
Right, right. So let's go into this just a little further. So when all this is happening, the aftermath is it's a great mystery, but it lingers, and it's in major newspapers. It's not a covered up, oh, they glossed over it or whatever. They came out with a cover story eventually. But my question on that is, when you think of this Tower of Babel concept that you came up with, something I want to tie in here from Linda's work and yours is Philip J. Corso. And so I'm going to try to do this in a condensed fashion, but he basically was this lieutenant colonel who worked in the Foreign Technology Office who came out and said, we've been reverse engineering this technology for a long time, and a number of things came out related to this, the microchip and so on. Now, a lot of people, there's a lot of controversy about it, but the one thing we can say about Corso is he was where he said he was. So we know that he had those high-level contacts, worked for Eisenhower, worked for Kennedy, and so forth. But you found something, the most amazing thing that you found, I think, about what he said, wasn't really that. It was this idea that we had caught up to whoever was out there doing this.
Yeah, in his book, Day After Roswell, at the time that came out, he was sort of the sensation in ufology. I'm not a ufologist, but that was the impression I got at the time. And then people sort of turned away from him. And the consensus now seems to be that they're very dismissive of him. I'm not, because I think that he was writing a very difficult book and writing it extraordinarily carefully.
And I'm a person who spent 2 days with him, and I'm telling you, he's the real deal. And those that have been trying to dismiss are those that are threatened by the truth.
Well, when I read the book, what I was constantly fascinated by is when he would mention the extraterrestrial back engineering hypothesis, almost in the same breath and sometimes in the very next sentence, he's pointing fingers at Nazis. And this pattern is repeated several times in the book. So I thought, well, everybody else is jumping on his ET thing. I'm going to look at his Nazi thing. And in the context of him making these types of statements, you're probably familiar with them. He'll say one thing, and then next sentence he'll say something seemingly contradictory. And in the middle of this context of statements, he makes a statement that, yes, this was the whole purpose of mutually assured destruction, in his opinion, in building all of those thermonuclear warheads that the United States and the Soviet Union and other countries were stockpiling during the Cold War, wasn't about the mutually assured destruction of the United States or Soviet Union. It was if ET came and invaded the United States, the Soviet Union would have enough warheads to prevent them from taking over the rest of the world. And conversely, if they invaded the Soviet Union, we could do the same. So in other words, it wasn't mutually assured destruction the way we've been taught it at all. It was mutually assured destruction for an invasion to prevent any invader off planet from coming on planet Earth and destroying us.
That's fascinating.
That's fascinating. And then he goes on to do something else, and that is this situation continued. And stop and think of it. Remember what happened just prior to the end of the Cold War, all of a sudden, the United States and the Soviet Union began dismantling thousands of warheads and sending inspectors to each other's countries to make sure that we were really dismantling our warheads.
They talked
Now-
at one point about bringing that down to zero.
To zero. Gorbachev and Reagan, yeah, you know, their aides were horrified. You know, they were in there negotiating, and well, let's get rid of them altogether. And when I heard that, I thought, even Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, in whatever sibyllitic state of synesthetic synesthesia that they were in at the time, couldn't possibly have been that stupid. There's a reason they're doing this. And I thought, well, this has to be because they've got something better. Yeah, Star Wars worked, you know. So you read in Corso, I'm thinking this, and then Corso's book comes out, and then he says something true that I find today, and you probably do too, truly amazing. He says, well, we managed finally to stalemate the ETs during the Reagan administration, and that's what SDI was all about, something like that.
That's
Remember
right.
that statement?
That's
and,
right.
and what really grabbed me there was, oh, so we were at war?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, right.
Gee,
it's called a secret war.
it's called a secret war, yeah, and here's this lieutenant colonel saying these, lieutenant colonel in the Army saying these things. But I'm inclined to believe them because in his statements concerning Nazis, you can go and find all the technologies that he lists as coming from ETs, and then in the very next sentence he'll mention Nazis. Well, every one of them, with the exception of Kevlar, came from Nazis. So it's a very cleverly written piece of work. So I'm personally not inclined to dismiss him too quickly. He wrote that book, in my opinion, very, very carefully. It's a very carefully crafted book.
And I can tell you one thing because I have a copy. He sent me a copy of his original, handwritten, entirely handwritten. And what the book is that you can get went through the process mill of Bill Burns and Simon and Schuster. And when you read his original handwritten, this is a person who was handpicked by General Arthur Trudeau, who was one of the few friends that Eisenhower truly respected from World War II, because General Trudeau, I believe at that time, was the only PhD serving in the Army and was a general. And he had an engineering background, and Corso told me that he had been in the presence of them, and that Eisenhower handpicked General Trudeau to be that first head of Army R&D in the Pentagon because he trusted him and respected him so much from the war. Trudeau knew Corso from the campaign in Italy. So that was the world then, when those that had served in the war, they knew by fire who they trusted. Here is another thing that Corso told me in sitting across from him at a table close, seeing his eyes. He said, General Trudeau said that when Eisenhower came to him with this proposal that they were going to take the extraterrestrial technology and get it into corporations and get it patented, that Eisenhower said to Trudeau, and these are the words I've never forgotten, they were from Corso, the CIA is our enemy and I do not want them involved. You, General Trudeau, you are the only person to handle this. I believe that is exactly what the mentality would have been, because this was 1958 when this process started with Corso and Trudeau.
Well, that makes perfect sense, because Eisenhower's fighting World War II, while Allen Dulles and company from Sullivan and Cromwell are secretly negotiating with Nazis to put an end to it. And of course, Allen Dulles ends up as CIA director, during that time. So that makes sense.
Well, something interesting about that, actually, that I want to follow up on, which is if we really take it from the fact that they were battling something out there, and we've seen those NASA tapes where it looks like a battle to me. It looks like SDI in process against these crafts that are coming around the Earth. And that comes from NASA itself, so there's no CGI going on. I think it's from 2001 also, and CGI wasn't so hot. It just was on their feed, and somebody was at home taping it, and there it is for the world to see. But Catherine, is that the rationale that they used to sell drugs into the black budget?
Well, I think if you follow the history of narcotics trafficking globally, narcotics trafficking is, from a financial standpoint, a very efficient way to take over a place.
Mm-hmm.
It's the leverage buyout of a place, which is financed with the cash flow from that place. So I sell them something that makes them weaker and makes it easier for me to take them over cheaper. And I buy them with their own money. Okay? And it's worked very well all around the world for, several centuries. So if you look at the history of this, it's very, very old. But it started to come in, the real, so part of the key to building a narcotics trafficking business is to make all those drugs illegal.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
So if you, there's a great book by Dan Russell called Drug Wars that describes the relationship between the creation of the Federal Reserve, the creation of the IRS, and the implementation of narcotics into the United States. It's
Okay.
all it's remarkable symmetry in how it's done. But what you saw was that drug money build a power structure bottom up to sort of organize and sabotage every neighborhood with control files. And that gave you the ability to control politically the government votes, the government money. So literally you're controlling the federal budget through your control of the local, you're controlling 3,100 counties at a time, which is why every year during the presidential cycle, I cry every time, because these guys are controlling the entire federal budget by controlling 3,100 counties, but nobody's interested in the 3,100 county elections. They're only interested in the yakety yak up here, which is totally irrelevant to the bottom-up control.
Right.
So it's funny, when I was on Wall Street in Washington, I could never understand why people thought drugs was so important.
Mhm.
Because if you look at financial fraud, it's much more profitable and much more economically powerful in nominal dollars.
Right.
But where drugs are phenomenally economic is their ability in the whole process of sabotaging a place to buy that place with its own money. And when you end up owning the place, you also have a control file on just about everybody. So it's a takeover model, and the question, of course, gets back to, who's controlling it. The reality is, if you look at the enforcement process, it's really the enforcement bureaucracy, a portion of it, that controls it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the intelligence services, they have people in there, regardless of the kind of nasty work that they do, who have some sense of ethical balance. Were they feeding them this thing of, look at this threat, we need all this money to build these ships, we can't tell the public about it, let's run drugs this way through these things, or is it far more compartmentalized than that?
Well, when you go back and you look from the end of World War II through, say, early 1980s, what you hear from many, many people is, look, it was the best of a lot of bad alternatives. We had to get the money.
Which sounds a lot like, I didn't know what I was doing, or I was just under orders.
Well, but here's the very interesting thing, and this is, as Joseph would say, high-octane speculation. What happened in the beginning of the 80s is the fraud suddenly took off, and it literally went crazy.
Okay, so we're in the 70s, and it's at a very low level, and then we're getting into the 80s in Iran-Contra. Gorbachev and Reagan are teaming up, and suddenly the fraud
Well,
goes
but
off the
let's
charts.
look at what happened. If you look, so Iran-Contra was when it went nuts. And if you talk to some of the intelligence operatives who were doing the fraud at that time, what they said to me is, we couldn't believe it. We did 25 million, we got away with it. We said, well, let's go for 50, and we got away with it, and they're kind of building this thing. And then if you look at what happened in the 90s, they took those models, came back, and did it on an enormous scale, layered derivatives on top, and took the same models and did it in the stock market. So they really, they didn't just double up, they quadrupled, times exponential to the 10. But it all started, and there was a moment when, all these guys are managing it, and they seem to have some sort of control, and it's ugly and it's difficult, but, as the Godfather would say, this is the world that we,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And then suddenly, and I could never figure out what was that. And then I was watching the interview of Norm Berglund, and I
Rings
got
of Saturn.
I got a copy of Rings of Saturn, and he's describing how Voyager passes Saturn, and they think that these are, live spaceships, plasma-based spaceships.
The thing in the rings was
Right.
the science article.
Right. And I think what happened was they got a load of what was docking in the rings, and they just
Scared him.
it scared them down to their, to the tips of their toes, and they said, I don't know if you've ever seen a dog suddenly see a bigger dog for the first time. I had a Saint Bernard, no, seriously, I had a Saint Bernard who was the most sluggish dog I've ever had, and then I took him down to the stables, and he saw my horse, and he went crazy trying to kill the horse. And it was like his brain turned off. He was out of control. It was primordial. And that, I think, is the reaction of the black budget and that culture. They took one look at that, and they said, trillions, we want, I don't care how you get, just do it. And it literally went out of control trying to get
very
enormous
That's
amounts
so
of money.
fascinating. Now, here's something that's interesting on that, and I just want to summarize that real briefly. We, were aware, certainly, that there were craft out there. We've been aware of it for many years. And, we had our own space program going up there. We've seen them. And so, at some point, they go out there with Voyager, and like Berggren reports, they see these large-scale, really almost planet-sized craft, and all bets are off, and they go bananas about it. So my question from there is...
They say now that Voyager shut down, and during that period, they couldn't get any pictures, yeah.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, that was in my Popular Science a year ago. Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, Joseph, actually, you mentioned to me when we were speaking about this that there were a number of satellites that shut off at certain points. Can you go into that?
Well, yeah, you had I forget which one it was, the Mars Orbital Observer, I forget what the actual official name is, that we were told went to Mars, and it either was turned off or crashed. I think the explanation was it crashed. And I remember this because I was talking with friends about it. I even talked with Richard Hoagland about it, and we just had a good belly laugh over it. Because we were told that one team of scientists managing this thing was and this was on mainstream media, okay? One team of scientists was using the English imperial system of measures, which right there I said, wait a minute. Anybody working in science will tell you that they use the metric measurement system. And that the other team of scientists was using, the metric system. I thought, wait a minute. And this was the excuse they gave for why this Mars probe went black. And then there was that...
There was the Beagle in England.
The Beagle.
There was the Phobos and the
yes,
Soviet.
the Phobos, Soviet things. We've had enormous amounts of satellites going to Mars that seem to be mysteriously lost, which I think in some cases they take them black. They claim they're lost, they take them black, and then they can download whatever they want back to Earth. But I recall some story, and I don't even know if it's true or not, but given all the other high strangeness, why not? of one of the Mars landers. Remember hearing about this? One of the Mars landers that suddenly just died, and NASA's explanation was, well, there was too much dust on the
Oh,
solar
yeah.
panels of Mars.
Yes.
And then along
Spirit.
Spirit, yes,
Spirit.
that's it. And a few days later, it comes back on. NASA's mystified, and yeah, and it's like someone came along with paper towels and Windex and cleaned it off for them. You know, I don't know what's going on.
You know, that's so fascinating because Linda, you had an experience, and I was listening to it, and it takes a lot to shock me, really. But you were talking to this scientist about Ceres, and it was really some of the best, most up-to-date reporting. I think you had the info on that before anybody, and. So you're talking to him, and you are trying to get him to describe, this spot that keeps showing up on Ceres and the history of it, and it's actually been there for a number of years. And you say, yeah, but it'll be going by again, and you should be able to get better pictures.
That's right.
And what did he say to you?
He said, "We do not have a camera that will give us the resolution we need." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because we didn't have enough budget to get the camera that we needed." Now,
But we've lost $2.2 trillion.
and honestly, you run into these kinds of
was
discussions, and you don't know whether the scientist is truly innocent and naive and was told we can't have the camera because the Department of Defense says you can't have a camera, or they didn't have budget. That is a true story that it persists to this day, and they are now still saying that in December, when the spacecraft gets down over, it's supposed to be 235 miles, the lowest point over Ceres. And have any of you been following my work at Earth Files about what happened? I had done 3 different interviews with 3 different scientists involved with the Dawn spacecraft. And the last one was with Christopher Russell, he's sort of Mr. Planetary Scientist at the university in UCLA. And he, at the last interview before I talked to him twice, he was totally enthusiastic. "Linda, I loved talking with you. You've got to call me back when we get to 970 miles. Which would be in this fall." So I called him up on exactly the date that he had told me to call him. And we're starting an interview. He had said yes, and we're getting into it. And I start saying, "Sir, I was hoping that for this interview that I could have some of the 970 mile above the surface so we could see these spots closer." And there's nothing. I said, "What they've put out on the net is really an old photograph." And he said, "Oh, I know, we have lovely new photographs." And he used the word lovely. And his voice sounded depressed, and he said, "But we have a scientist who has a paper with a hypothesis about what the white spots are, and it is being embargoed by nature until they approve it." And I said, "Well, has it been accepted?" He said, "No, that's another problem. It hasn't been accepted yet." I said, "Sir, am I understanding that you're telling me that you haven't released any of the new photos on Ceres that taxpayers paid for because nature has this embargoed and has not even approved the science paper?" And there was this pause, and he said, "Yes, it's true, Linda, but you are right. The taxpayers have paid for this. I'm going to call up the editors of Nature and see if we can't come to a compromise." And he said, "Well, let's do this interview, and then I'm going to break this. I don't like this either. I think we should have the photos." I'm not kidding. This is
Amazing.
exactly what happened.
I'm going to, it's
But-
really,
but-
I'm just going to, I have to close
one-
and say goodbye to the stream
Oh,
people
oh,
because at 9 o'clock the stream is ending. So we're going to do that, but we will finish the story for the people here. So for all the people who've been watching from home, oh, okay, you're going to keep going. Okay, great. Well, they're going to go, the live stream will keep going as well.
Well, I just wanted to
Okay,
finish.
but when we're done with this section, then we'll have some questions.
Well,
Okay.
this is worth hearing what happens, because he had said call back the next day and about these photos. And when I tried to call back, now he's not taking the phone call. I emailed, sir, is there any possibility of getting these images? And here was a man who was asking me to call him. And the next day, nothing. And all of you are sitting here, I'm sure know, there has not been a single release of the 970 over the Ceres crater. And we're supposed to be at 235 in the third week of December, 235 miles. If they have not released photos by 235 in December, honestly, what are we up against? Does this mean that somebody is trying to keep the Earth now from knowing about something that might be a structure? None of us know. The very fact that they're withholding images, I never thought this would happen. And this is Ceres out between Mars and Jupiter.
Oh, amazing.
Can I say one thing? I'm not surprised.
You're not surprised?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I mean,
Okay, so
They cover
we have
stuff
just a
up all
few
the time.
minutes left. And what I'd like to do we have a mic set up for questions? Can we? Okay. All right, so this is what we're going to do. Basically, what I'd like to say to everyone, and this is really an amazing panel and an amazing discussion. I'd go on for 6 more hours. That's just the way I am. But it is late, and we have realities there. Here's the interesting thing I want to close on. We've seen how this process developed. We talked about how in the 80s it exploded. We know it went further back during the JFK era, and we've really seen this secret space program develop. My question is, where are we now? And because of time, we have to keep the answer short, but Olav, let's start with you. Where are we now in the secret space program?
well, my thing is alternative 3. So I think we're on Mars. I think we're on.
And can you explain what Alternative 3 is?
Oh, I did the whole.
That is, I know, but it's the movie, but just say what it is.
Yeah, it's a movie that gives you the blueprint for the end of the world.
It's a mockumentary.
It's a mockumentary, and it's supposed to what it is the model for how the elites are going to escape
Okay,
the Earth
okay.
and leave us all to rot.
So go ahead.
I think it's underway. I think we're on the moon. I think we're on Mars. I think there's possibly people on Venus. I think they cover up stuff all the time in the solar system because they don't want us to see what's out there. And personally, I think 90% of it's human.
Okay, and
That's my
Linda?
group.
Where are we now in the secret space program?
I think that we are on track between now and the end of 2016 to get that worldwide 3-inch headline that we're not alone in the universe. And then once that's out, it doesn't matter if it's microbes on Mars, swimming creatures in Enceladus, another solar system. It's just that we need to crack open. We're not alone in this universe, and as soon as that happens, everyone on this planet, hybrid, ET, and human, have a right to start talking in the open about what's happening between them and the universe, and the implication is we will get to non-humans.
Fascinating. Catherine, where are we now?
I have absolutely no idea. That's why I keep coming to these conferences to try and find out. So, I blew my chance to have lunch with aliens. So ever since then, but
Can you tell that story real quick?
I can tell that story real quick.
Okay.
How many people have heard that story? I don't want to just bore the
Just
audience.
throw it out
Okay.
there. It's fabulous.
Okay, I'll do it really fast.
Okay.
It's hard to do it really fast. Okay, so I was in a very. Has anybody here seen the movie Enemy of the State? Raise your hand if you've seen Enemy. Okay, so I played Will Smith in real life, and had a big food fight squabble with the U.S. government, and it went on for. It's a Shaggy Dog story, but. Right at the beginning, a fellow who ran a think tank that did a lot of work for the Navy, probably somebody you've run into, called me and said, I see from the papers that you're available and I had dinner with him, and he said, look, the Undersecretary of the Navy and I are interested in doing a very high-level strategic plan for the Navy, and we would like your help, and we see from the papers that you're probably available. And I said, well, according to the papers, I'm going to be in jail shortly, so the Navy might not want to be associated with me. He says, oh, the Undersecretary knows that's just politics. Don't worry about it. So the Undersecretary and his wife came to my house for brunch, and, you know, we had a very nice thing and agreed. I made a deal with a think tank that they would help me with my situation. We'd trade hours, so it wouldn't cost them any money. And so off we went, and we went to a series of think tanks, and I had all these really fascinating meetings with a group of retired admirals and generals who kind of hang out and get paid by these think tanks. And after about the third meeting, I shut the door after it was over. I said, look, you know, I'll call the gentleman Harry. I said, look, Harry, I'm a very high-performance person. I want to know what's the deliverable here. I want to know if we do something for the Navy, we need to do a good job. They need to get the report and say, wow, this really helped, this really worked. So I want to know what's the deliverable, what's the bottom line here. And he said, well, the Navy wants a high-level plan on how to function in a world where the average American knows that ET exists and lives among us. And I said, well, you know, I don't know that. I don't know that ET exists and lives among us. And he looked me dead in the eye and said, would you like to have lunch with some aliens? And no, don't laugh, don't laugh. Because my number one fear here is disinformation, because 90% of what's going on in this world is disinformation. So I had this image. Suddenly in my mind, I could see myself checking out at the grocery store, and there was the National Enquirer, and it says, Fitz thinks she's lunching with aliens. And I thought, that's how they're finally going to get me, because this was quite a food fight, a lot of PR going back and forth. So big smear campaign. So I said, you know, John, I'm dealing with too much risk now to be seen lunching with aliens. Great line. So I said, are there any books I can read? And that's when I read Corso. I read every book on the tie, many, about 25 books, high speed, boom, like that. And I couldn't make any sense of it. So then John, the project petered out, and I was calling him Harry. Harry asked me to join the board of the think tank. So the first day I walk in, and James Woolsey is sitting with his back.
CIA director.
Former CIA. He had left in '95. And I was trying to figure out who was doing all this surveillance and physical harassment and smear on me. You know, I was like, who's my problem? And Woolsey's flipping his pen. I sit down next to him, and I said, James, how are you? It's so good to see you. And he freaked, and the pen went up and hit the ceiling, and that's when I knew, oh,
That
the
was
CIA,
who was doing.
CIA is my problem. He's
Yes,
feeling guilty.
yes,
Never thought
yes.
he'd have to face me at a board meeting. So the head of the, you know, so you got 10 corporate guys. We had Citibank, Global Business Network, James Woolsey, and so I have a meeting. When you join a board, in the first meeting, you don't talk. You just listen. You know, you're the newbie. So so they start to talk about how the project that they want to do that year is a big white paper on how the American people can come to grips with the fact that aliens exist and live among us. And I'm listening, and normally when you have 10 really important, powerful corporate guys in a room, and you're talking about a deep, dark secret, there's very powerful resonation. There was no resonation in this room. Everybody's really uncomfortable. I thought, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What's going on? Are they trying to, like, trick me?
Yeah.
And so anyway, one thing led to another, and I had to, I decided I would leave Washington and move to Tennessee. So I went to resign for the board. And that's when I was publishing on the narcotics trafficking by the American military and intelligence establishment. And the executive director got very upset with me. He said, the military would never deal drugs. I said, wait, you're saying aliens? We could have lunch with aliens.
But we can't talk about the military trading drugs.
Right. He said they would never. I said Vietnam was a drug war. Where have you been? So it was kind of, you know, your head needed a bungee rope in all these situations. But anyway, so I left, and then when 9/11 happened, 9/11 was very effective. You know, it was achieved many different goals, but one of many goals that it achieved was helping to move a lot of the black budget on budget. Okay, because one of the problems, it had become so dysfunctional to get the money by illegal means that you really needed to much more systemically, so there's a big shift in sort of the financing, making it much more sort of professional. Anyway, so I kept trying to interest all the group, the 9/11 Truth Movement, in looking at the black budget. Because to me, whatever was going on, it was very driven by black budget money, black budget technology, et cetera. I just didn't think we could look at it without asking those questions. So I wrote an article called What's Up with the Black Budget, where I told the story.
Yes. Amazing
And-
article.
Right, and then a long process began where they all said I was liars. And I got a call from somebody in London who said, look, I published the definitive journal on UFOs, and we, the UFO community, is discussing who to believe, Jim Woolsey and this other guy, or you. And he said, so I want to interview. I said, well, I put everything, there's nothing else I can tell you. Believe it or not, I don't really care. If it's useful, great. If not, I don't care. So I can't help you. I hung up. He called me back a month later, and he said, we, the UFO community, have decided you're telling the truth. I said, oh, pray tell, why am I so lucky? And he said, apparently Woolsey and this other guy have done it to other people. You're not the first.
Right.
So I
yeah.
have no idea what that whole situation was about.
That's
Who's,
fascinating.
Oh.
who's the we in England taking the face of the UFO community?
I don't
Jo-
even remember.
Joseph, to get your point of view on this, to close out the conference.
Have you ever had lunch with aliens?
No.
Or maybe you
I've had
have
a
and
few
didn't
strange
know.
bishops I've had.
Strange bishops. Where are we now in the secret space program? You've charted it, through Corso, through all these other things. Where are we now?
I definitely think it exists. I think it has existed for a very long time. Like Walter pointed out yesterday, it could be all the way back into the 19th century. I do think probably its technologies would astonish us.
Right.
There's a reason that they're talking about mining the moon and Mars and asteroids right now. And trust me, folks, as I've said many times, chemical rockets ain't going to do the job. If they're talking about it, that's one thing. If they're talking about it with chemical rockets, that's, as far as I'm concerned, either cover story or they're deluded. So I definitely think it exists. I think we're there. I don't know to what extent, everybody else's guess here is as good as mine. But the other thing I think is that there has been, particularly since 9/11, this is something I sense or intuit rather than have argued. I think that there is considerable factional infighting going on within whatever this group or groups are, that they're struggling for control of this thing. I think all of this business in Syria with Mr. Putin and so on, I think that's kind of the public manifestation of something much larger going on behind the scenes. And that's what I think.
Fascinating. Wow, incredible. Everybody, it's the speakers from the Secret Space Program Conference. Let's give them a huge round of applause.
I'm gonna wrap it up.
Thank you so much. Now, Jerome, who is the founder of this conference and has gone through all this trouble to put it on, along with Robert and this amazing crew, has a few words for you. It's good to see you, by the way.
Welcome. and next conference, I'm gonna make sure that you're a day earlier
You
before.
promised me the private plane. I was waiting for it.
Okay, so let's go through my list of thank yous. This will only take 5 minutes, and then we really have to leave the venue. That's the deal with the owner. Security has left, so there's regulations also involved. So, first of all, I want to thank the volunteers. One thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
One thing that I noticed from the people here in Texas is that they're very friendly.
Yes. Texas.
And not in a fake way.
Hear, hear.
then second of all, this is our fifth event that we're doing. And so we also had 5 AV teams. This is the best one so far.
Yes.
So I want to give a round of applause for the professionality of those guys. Of course, there's no conference without an audience who's gonna pay substantial money, and I'm aware of that. These things cost a lot of money, but also for the people who are coming, it costs a lot of money. Some people fly in, take off from work, rent a car, pay their ticket, need to buy food. So I want to thank you for making this possible. I also want to thank the people on the live stream for chipping in, who don't have the funds to make it here, but want to be educated more, and I hope to spread the news about this. There's one lady here in the Austin area, and she knows who she is. I want to thank her. Without her, also this conference wouldn't have happened. She helped me out in a financial way. So thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Of course, I want to thank the speakers and Daniel, because what Robert and I are trying to do is we're trying to change the conference culture in this whole alternative community. We have to step it up, people. So that means that we have to get more credibility, and that starts with inviting the right speakers on the program. There's too much woo-woo out there. There's too much disinformation. It has become entertainment for the most of us for all these years. And we need to come up with a product that is going to be accepted by mainstream. Because if we think in the alternative community that change is going to come from us, then I think we're naive. The numbers are way too small. We need mainstream to make the paradigm shift. At least that's my personal opinion. But mainstream is only going to accept a product that looks good, that feels good, and that they understand. And so step by step, we're trying to get to that level. I want to invite you to our future events. We're having 3 lined up. The next one is going to be a Global BAM Breakthrough Energy conference. The one after that, we're going to do about transhumanism, because I think that is going to be a very big topic the next coming years. And Elon Musk and those other guys are correctly. It is a threat. It is a threat to humanity, and we need to discuss that. The third one is, of course, we're going to do another secret space program. And I don't want to make any promises, but from the 5 venues that we had, this one is also the best.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I hope there's a big chance that we're going to return here. And I know everybody's faces, so see you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I should mention here that the entire conference is going to be available at secretspaceprogram.org for download. And there's a couple of options to rent it or buy it or watch certain sections of it or just watch the whole thing. I know I'll be watching the whole thing. So just to let you know, that's going to be there.
I want to make one comment about that. Every attendee that was here is going to get a link from us that they can that they have the conference for themselves to watch at any moment. The people there is a little bit confusion on the stream side of people. If you have bought a stream, you will also be able to watch it whenever you want. It's not that you have to buy it again when we put it online. You will be notified, and so I hope that it's clear to the stream people also. You only have to pay once, and that's it.
Did you get that, stream people?
That's all, folks.
Thank you very much. You've been a fantastic.
I know.